Captain Ibrahim Traoré emerged onto the world stage with startling speed, a young officer stepping into a role of immense national responsibility. At the time he took power, he was only 34 years old, making him one of the youngest leaders globally, which immediately captured attention both within Africa and internationally. His youth really presented a stark contrast to many established political figures, signaling a potential shift in generational leadership. This wasn't a gradual political ascent through established parties or lengthy campaigns. Instead, it was a sudden and decisive move that placed him at the very helm of Burkina Faso, a nation facing profound challenges. His age became a symbol, for some of inexperience but for many others, of fresh energy and a break from the past. His rise to power was dramatic and swift, occurring in September 2022 through a military coup. This was Burkina Faso's second coup in that same year, which is honestly an indicator of the deep instability and political turmoil gripping the West African nation. Traoré, then an army captain, led the group of soldiers who overthrew the existing military junta, citing a failure to effectively combat the escalating Islamist insurgency as a primary reason for their intervention. The takeover was not just a change of guard, but a statement of intent, a declaration that a new, more assertive approach was needed to address the country's dire security situation. This decisive action immediately positioned him as a central figure in the Sahel region's complex political landscape. As the military ruler, Captain Traoré assumed the position of interim president of Burkina Faso. This means he is not only the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but also the head of state, responsible for guiding the nation's policies and direction until a planned return to constitutional rule. His leadership is defined by the military junta, known as the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration, or MPSR, which he now leads. This role places immense pressure on his shoulders as he navigates both internal security threats and complex international relations. His military background heavily influences his governance style, which is often characterized by direct orders and a focus on national security as the paramount concern for his administration. For a significant portion of the Burkinabe population, and indeed for many observers across Africa, Captain Traoré is viewed as a hero, a figure of decisive action in a time of crisis. They see him as someone willing to take bold steps to protect his nation from the violent extremist groups that have caused so much suffering and displacement. His supporters often point to his youth as a sign of vigor and a departure from older, entrenched political systems they believe have failed. This perception is fueled by a deep frustration with previous governments' inability to stem the tide of violence and a yearning for strong leadership that prioritizes national sovereignty and security above all else. His promises to reclaim the country resonated deeply. Captain Traoré has very strong ideas about Africa and its place in the world, championing a robust Pan-Africanist vision. He consistently speaks about the continent needing to unite and assert its independence from external influences, particularly those he sees as neo-colonial. His rhetoric often evokes historical figures of African liberation movements, positioning himself as a modern-day leader fighting for true sovereignty. This vision extends beyond Burkina Faso, as he calls for other African nations to also reevaluate their relationships with global powers and to forge paths that prioritize African interests. He believes that Africa's strength lies in its unity and its ability to control its own destiny, free from the dictates of others. A key aspect of his leadership has been a deliberate and public break from the influence of former colonial powers, most notably France. Burkina Faso, like many West African nations, has had a long and complex relationship with France. Traoré's government has taken concrete steps to diminish this historical dependence, including demanding the withdrawal of French troops stationed in the country and re-evaluating long-standing agreements. This move was hugely popular among segments of the population who view France's continued presence and influence as a form of neo-colonialism. He argues that such relationships have not adequately benefited Burkina Faso and that it is time for the nation to stand on its own 2 feet. As Burkina Faso distanced itself from France, Captain Traoré actively sought new alliances, most significantly strengthening ties with Russia. This strategic pivot has been a defining feature of his foreign policy, reflecting a broader trend in the Sahel region where some leaders are looking beyond traditional Western partners, The cooperation with Russia has reportedly included military support and training, seen by Traoré's government as vital in the fight against extremist groups. This shift is not just about security, it's also a geopolitical statement, signaling Burkina Faso's intent to diversify its partnerships and assert its autonomy on the international stage, choosing allies based on its own perceived national interests. His speeches, particularly at international forums like the Russia-Africa Summit, are often fiery and direct, urging fellow African leaders to stop acting as puppets of imperialist powers. These strong declarations resonate widely, especially with younger Africans who are frustrated by what they perceive as continued foreign interference and exploitation of the continent's resources. Traoré's unapologetic stance against perceived Western dominance and his call for genuine African self-determination have made him a prominent voice in the discourse on Pan-Africanism. He challenges the status quo, asking African nations to reclaim their agency and to work collectively for a more equitable global order, ensuring their voices are heard. Captain Traoré has introduced significant economic ideas aimed at ensuring Burkina Faso benefits more from its own natural resources, particularly its valuable gold reserves. His government has moved to take more control of the mining sector, which has historically been dominated by foreign companies. He believes that the nation's wealth should primarily serve its citizens, funding development and improving living standards, rather than flowing predominantly outwards. This approach involves a fundamental reassessment of existing contracts and a push for greater national ownership and oversight in the extraction and processing of minerals, a policy shift that has generated both support and concern. One of the concrete steps taken under his leadership includes the establishment of a state-owned mining company. Furthermore, his administration has mandated that foreign mining firms must give the state a 15% stake in their local operations and are required to transfer skills to Burkinabe citizens, fostering local expertise. A landmark initiative is the construction of Burkina Faso's first gold refinery and the creation of national gold reserves, moves designed to capture more value from the gold produced within the country. These reforms are part of a left-leaning economic strategy focused on resource nationalism, aiming to redirect the profits from the nation's mineral wealth back into the Burkinabe economy. Despite these ambitious reforms, Captain Traoré's government faces immense and ongoing problems with violent extremist groups that control significant parts of the country. The Islamist insurgency, which has plagued Burkina Faso for nearly a decade, continues to launch devastating attacks, causing widespread displacement and a severe humanitarian crisis. These groups, affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, have proven resilient, and their activities undermine stability and development efforts. The security situation remains precarious, representing the most significant challenge to Traoré's leadership and his promises to restore peace and order throughout the national territory. The fight is far from over. In response to the persistent insecurity, Traoré's government changed the approach to dealing with these extremist groups. He has adopted what is described as a total war strategy, a significant departure from previous government policies that sometimes supported local peace talks and negotiations with jihadist factions. In 2024, his junta officially outlawed such local dialogues, opting instead for a more militaristic and uncompromising stance. This shift reflects a belief that only a strong military response can defeat the insurgents. However, this strategy has also drawn criticism, with some humanitarian organizations and community leaders concerned that it could exacerbate civilian suffering and close off potential avenues for de-escalation and reconciliation. While pursuing his agenda, Captain Traoré's government has faced criticism for its tough actions against perceived opponents, the media, and civil society groups. Reports have emerged of crackdowns on dissent, with arrests of individuals, including security officers, journalists, and activists, who have been critical of the junta. Some have faced charges like sedition or terrorism, while others have reportedly been forcibly conscripted into the army to fight on the front lines against insurgents, a tactic seen by human rights groups as a way to silence critical voices. These measures have raised concerns about the shrinking space for freedom of expression and political opposition under his military rule. The pressure on those who displease the regime is palpable. Several journalists and civil society figures have found themselves targeted, and the media landscape has become increasingly challenging for independent reporting. The forced drafting of critics into the Volunteer Defense Forces, a civilian auxiliary supporting the army, is a particularly controversial tactic. It effectively sends dissenters to dangerous combat zones, a move that many interpret as a direct punishment for their views or reporting. Such actions have led to a climate of fear for some, even as the government maintains its actions are necessary for national security and unity in the face of existential threats. Despite these controversies and the authoritarian measures, Captain Ibrahim Traoré enjoys considerable popularity, especially among many young people across Africa and within the diaspora. Those who support him often see him as a strong, decisive leader who is unafraid to challenge Western influence and fight for African dignity and sovereignty. His youth, his Pan-African rhetoric, and his assertive stance against perceived neo-colonialism strike a chord with a generation frustrated by poverty, corruption, and the perceived failures of traditional democratic models imported from the West. They see him as a symbol of hope and a catalyst for change. Ultimately, Captain Traoré matters because he embodies a growing sentiment across Africa, a desire for new leadership that prioritizes self-reliance, resource control, and a definitive break from colonial-era dependencies. He inspires many because he speaks a language of empowerment and defiance that resonates deeply with those who feel marginalized by the current global order. While his methods are contentious and the long-term outcomes of his rule remain uncertain, his rise reflects a powerful yearning for African agency and a new kind of leadership. He represents a bold, if controversial, vision for the future, one that many young Africans are eager to embrace.